Welcome back, everybody. This is Steve Brewster, and this is Anglers Rights Alliance Week 11. We are here to discuss what's going on in the fisheries, how badly it's messed up, and what you can do to fix it in North Carolina to take your fisheries back so that we can have seasons again, so that we can have a better future in fisheries for our children and for years to come, many, many generations to come. The news this week, the Wildlife Resources Commission, as you all know, had announced its 4-day flounder season. What we're coming out with now is that the Rules and Review Commission has agreed with them. So that season is now officially recognized as being a legal season. Now, does this mean that Marine Patrol can still ticket you in joint waters? I don't know. But if it is fully recognized as legal by the Rules and Review Commission as well, and the Rules and Review Commission does show it in joint waters, as you can see here, then it should not be a situation where you can be ticketed in joint waters during those 4 days. They have also come out and said that they are going to be monitoring the ramps that are in the most likely areas for us to be harvesting flounder, so that they're still keeping some sort of record, some sort of accounting to make sure that we at least monitor the level of impact on the species so that we can account for that in the future, right? So we're still being responsible. So now we have the Wildlife Resources Commission as well as the Rules and Review Commission agreeing with them and backing with them. This is pretty big news, folks. If any of you have not reached out to your representatives yet, you need to reach out to them. In the coming weeks, I am going to be taking Anglers Rights Alliance and building that into a website, and we are going to start to form voting pools, okay? So the only reason rich and powerful people can have a lot of influence on elections because they use their money. They make contributions to campaigns. Well, why do we want contributions to campaigns? So that we can pay for advertising to get votes. Folks, 1 in 11 people in North Carolina holds a coastal recreational fishing license. That's every single election in the entire state sewed up right there. All you have to do is get together, put your votes together, and then let your elected leaders know what the people of North Carolina would like to see and to show them these numbers. You know, if you reach out to them in big numbers, then they get a very good impression of what's going on there too. In fact, if any of you would like to help me with my legislator that I am currently pursuing, I have been sort of getting kind of put off a little bit by my Senate leader here in my district. If some of you would like to help me out, if you would be willing to send an email or to make a phone call to this gentleman right here and let them know that you are backing Steve Brewster, that what I am telling them is accurate and what I would like to see changed in North Carolina is in fact a reflection of what the people of North Carolina want, what you want. And of course, guys, my phone number is always out there. If any of you have a problem with what I'm saying, you know, particularly commercial fishermen, if you want to come on, I've been looking for a commercial fisherman to come on one of the episodes and sit down and really talk it out so you get the whole picture here. Obviously, not someone that is NCFA, that is just in wild opposition, but even if one of you guys would like to sit down, of course, we can get your point out there. We can get your side of the story out there. So moving on to today's topic, we're going back to the Beaufort Maritime Museum, to the history, the early history. We're not going to go all the way up to today, but the early history of recreational fishing in North Carolina. Folks, this is going to blow your mind when you see the standard report from early recreational fishing in North Carolina. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did. It's absolutely real, folks. There are a ton of other articles, magazine articles, newspaper articles out there that you can go look up in the Internet Archives if you want to. I'll post some links for that stuff. It is absolutely wild. I hope you guys enjoy. Please reach out to your legislators and help me out with Senator Lozara there. Let him know that I'm not just some crazy person that's coming to him, doesn't know what I'm talking about. Thank you. You guys have a good one. We'll see you next week.
We'll be discussing where people went fishing in North Carolina during this early period, the species that were targeted, where people stayed, the watercraft they used, what the fishing experience was like, both inshore and offshore. Some important sources that I was able to exploit to really help tell this story were the early outdoor sporting publications of the period, publications like American Sportsman, Breeder and Sportsman, Forest and Stream Magazine, The Rod and the Gun. Those are really great publications, particularly Forest and Stream Magazine. they really covered a lot on hunting and fishing in Eastern North Carolina during this early period. Newspapers are pretty important as well. And specifically, where were they going out fishing? Primarily during this early period, it's more of an inshore recreational fishing, inshore sport fishing. They stuck around the inlets, capes, the sounds. They would seek out shipwrecks and reefs to go fishing off of. The offshore fishing was limited during this early period, but I do have an entire section on just that. So during this early period, there's this idea of more a quantity over quality in terms of catch. It wasn't necessarily the biggest fish that people are going after, because there's plenty of big fish during those earlier periods. People were fishing to a sort of extreme amount, but they favored fish like bluefish because they put up a really good fight. Cerro, Spanish mackerel, blackfish, hogfish, spot croaker, trout, and striped bass were the main species people were going after. And here's a great quote to sort of illustrate this point, where they have this quantity or quality. A friend, and this is about a fishing trip to Morehead City. A friend and myself caught with rod and reel trolling 327 Spanish mackerel in one day, 1,200 mackerel in 5 days. I went out alone on the first day of last August and caught 3 bluefish, 146 mackerel, 183 sea trout, and 75 croakers. I admit that this looks like slaughter, but but not one fish was wasted. They were all given to appreciative friends, and if I had not caught them, the netters would. So the real sport during this period is really kind of fishing till you're exhausted, catching as much as you possibly can in a single day. And if you don't catch it, somebody else will, is kind of the attitude. This is prior to really conservation being a big thing in North Carolina. This is prior to recreational fishing being regulated. So there's no trip limits, there's no bag limits. You can catch as many fish as you possibly could during this time period. That's for recreational fishing. There were rules though for commercial.
Okay, so it's definitely worth noting right here, the concept of conservation from the recreational side did not really exist. However, the commercial fishermen were very much concerned about conservation. They had already seen the effects of overfishing, and they saw how it negatively affected them. So the commercial side was very much conservatively minded.
So I'm going to just delve into the watercraft because, you're going out fishing. It's pretty important. So you have this interesting thing. So commercial fishing was huge in Eastern North Carolina. It's a very important industry. Most of my talks have dealt with commercial fishing. But during the summertime, things slowed down, and that's because there's a lack of onboard refrigeration on vessels. Your fish would spoil quickly. And so the commercial fishermen, as you had resorts emerging in Eastern North Carolina with the rise of resorts, you had commercial fishermen transitioning away from commercial fishing during the summer, and then they take up sport fishing in charter boats as a sort of seasonal employment, so they could stay active on the water year round. So around May or June, the commercial fishermen would take their boats and they would whitewash the sails, repaint the boats, make them look nice, install cushioned seats. In some instances, they even kind of talk about installing sort of cooler-like structures to put some blocks of ice in, so you can refrigerate a little bit of fish. And then actually going fishing, hiring a boat from out of Morehead City in 1888, you could hire a boat for 50 cents a day. In 1894, that price was about $3. So very affordable. There was also a lot of competition during the period. So one of the earliest vessel types is we call cunner. It's a sort of, the word is a corruption of the word canoe. They're essentially multi-log dugout canoe boats that were popular in the commercial fishing industry of North Carolina. They're popular boats going all the way back to the colonial period. These boats, and so there's a good example of one of these boats being used. There's a fishing trip that was but conducted by a Northerner. He was staying in Southport, and he was staying at Kate Stewart's house, her inn in Southport. And he hired a guy, Captain Piner, to take him out in his dugout log boat to go fishing. And he claimed he had a wonderful time fishing in the waters around Southport, and that the fishing was so good that no one would ever believe him. So there's no point in even telling any wild fish stories. But he says great. And he also mentioned that Wrightsville Beach is also a great place to go visit. The shad boat, North Carolina's official state boat, was very popular with sportsmen when they visited the Outer Banks. It was stable vessel. It was also sort of ubiquitous along with the Cunner in that part of the state. This isn't the best copy of this image, but these guys are actually holding rods, fishing rods. You can't quite tell that well with this particular version of the image.
All right, so really have to draw attention to that. Sailboats, guys. There were no outboard motors at this time on these things. Go back to that earlier report and recognize that these guys were using sailboats and in many cases cane poles. Sailboats and cane poles were yielding these kinds of catches. So when you hear somebody say there's more fish today than there have ever been, and this isn't really ancient history either, okay? So people that would have experienced this or would have been born around this time would have recently passed away, okay? This is just a few generations. This stuff happens really fast, and all the time there's always somebody there to say there's more fish than there's ever been, and yet the result is always the same. In the end, there are less and less and less fish.
Into actual experience of fishing, so inshore and nearshore fishing. So bluefish in Beaufort Inlet, 1871. You've got a group of men with Judge Ellie West from New Bern. Tom Daniels is their fishing guide. They catch 600 pounds of bluefish and some Spanish mackerel in 4 hours. So as soon as their lines are hitting the water, they're getting a bite. Another group caught 400 pounds of bluefish that day. The following day, another boat caught 500 pounds. It's pretty amazing. One of the sports writers writes about blue fishing in Beaufort, and he recommends August and September to come when he says the bluefish are particularly active, and he says they're getting up to 18 inches during that time period. He mentions that he even himself caught 400 in just a few hours. He mentions that you can come back later in the season, December, January, but you got to be tough, he says, because the weather is pretty harsh. But he said you can get 18 to 20 pound bluefish. And this is all like in the 1870s that he's writing. And so there's this great sort of lengthy quote, but it's all about trolling for bluefish here in Beaufort. It says, fast sailing clinker built sloop, rigged open boat, sailing back and forth in the inlet, just on the edge of the breakers, with the ravenous bluefish snapping at your spoon, sometimes taking it before it barely touches the water, with 3 other jolly fellows, all pulling for dear life to beat your score, every fellow with a 6-pounder almost certainly, and at times to have 10 to 12 pounds of animated fish fast hold of your hook, making our muscles crack to pull him in. All constitutes what is, to my mind, is the ne plus ultra of sport. This is 1874 that he's writing. So the competition is between you and your buddies to see who lands the most fish on that trip. And you're just, it's all very physical. They're using hand lines. There's no rod and reel. You got a long line with the hook, an artificial lure. Another person's writing about Spanish mackerel. He says, I've never experienced delirium until I saw 15-pound Spanish mackerel leap into the air and a struggle to shake himself free of the well-hooked artificial squid at the end of 200 feet of stout line. Also, it's hand lining. There's no rod and reel that's involved in this. You're all just muscling it in. And then there's this other quote where he's talking about fishing for drum at night, and you're falling asleep in the back of a boat and just waiting for a bite. And he's talking about drifting off and dreaming. And then all of a sudden you get this really violent tug on the line, and you're just abruptly woken from your dreams, and you struggle to bring the fish in, and then you go back to sleep, and then it happens again. And that's what sort of nighttime recreational fishing looks like in this area during that period. Flounder gigging was also sort of considered sport in Carteret County during this period as well. Pretty sport practiced along the shore is spearing flounders. A small rowboat is put adrift. A man with a flambeau walks along up to his knees in water. In the bow of the boat, sportsmen stand with slender gigs. Along the bottom, by the reflection of the light, can be seen white flounders half buried in the sand. They remain perfectly still while the gig is poised over them and never move until they are speared or missed. The only drawback to the sport is that occasionally your torchbearer is stung by a stingray. A stingray is simply a long buggy whip broken out with smallpox and filled with steel springs, aquafortis, and needles. When he hits you, lockjaw is the mildest result. So you've got a guy walking, instead of holding a flashlight, or you got someone holding a torch and dragging your pulling your boat through the water while you're spearing them, and sometimes your fishing guide's going to get hit by a stingray, and they didn't have very good medical treatment for it back then. Again, there's also a lot of trout fishing at Oregon Inlet. There's this group of tourists that go fish from the Nag's Head Hotel, I think. Or no, they're not. They're staying at Collington Island. But 5 tourists go out and they catch 800 spot and trout in 4 hours at the inlet. The second day they catch 300. Then they catch 25 on the third day in an hour, and they're pretty disappointed. Come the third day, they're not pulling them in by the hundreds anymore. There's also a quite extensive story that I found about fishing at New Inlet. They're fishing with hand lines again for trout, striped bass, sheep's head, red snapper, bluefish, drum. But they're using all kinds of bait, whatever they can figure out. They're using bacon and clams and crab meat. They're using eel and mullet. They're even improvising artificial lures out of whatever they have in their kit. They're using spoons to, I guess, to have something reflective in the water to try and lure in fish, and it's all working. There's also fishing at Ocracoke, but there's not as much reported on at Ocracoke, unfortunately, even though you have a pretty active hotel resort and there's tons of advertising for recreational fishing. It's just haven't been able to find as many stories, but there are some interesting ones. For instance, there's some swordfish that kind of wandered in close to shore, and people were able to catch swordfish. Also, some large bonito were being caught off Ocracoke as well in the 1890s. Some of the very largest mackerel caught this season were hooked by ladies who are as devoted to the sport as men, and this is about a fishing trip to Morehead City. And so women are very active in going out and fishing recreationally in this area. Another writer wrote in 1874, "I've known 3 ladies and 1 gentleman to take with hook and line 290 trout and drum in less than 3 hours while fishing in this harbor. Their boat anchored in one spot near the railroad wharf." So probably out during this time period. That means they're probably out in the Newport River. Talking about the Morehead City Railroad Wharf. Now, the offshore fishing experiences with these steamboats, we've got this story from May 1888. They're going 30 miles offshore, measured from the bar at the mouth of the Cape Fear River, and they're fishing in 81 feet of water. And the group that was on the boat caught 1,700 sea bass, snappers, and pigfish in one trip. And the guy writing the story wrote, "The hulling And the holing in of the lines was so rapid and so heavy was each hole that every man's fingers were cut through the skin. It's all hand lining. And on their way back, they stopped to fish at the rocks. On their way back to Wilmington to get some sheep's head. And this is the rocks. This is what he's referring to. And it's a giant breakwater in the Cape Fear River that was constructed in the 1870s to close off New Inlet. It also was just a really good artificial reef where a lot of people went recreational fishing in the Cape Fear River. And so there's this other quote about fishing offshore. The finest sport that I've had fishing is off the Cape Fear Bar in the vicinity of Frying Pan Shoal Lightship on the Blackfish grounds. There, the fishermen may throw the line with several hooks and often pull in to find more than one on his line, and usually he is kept busy, so eager are the fish to bite. There's also another reference in 1889, the group that went fishing at Cape Lookout. These guys from Raleigh, they say they boarded a Sharpie well manned by gentlemen of African persuasion and set sail for Moorhead for the fishing ground. On that trip, they're happy that they caught 253 fish, but they said that wasn't much for Moorhead fishing, but it was something for us.
All right, so I think you get the point by now. There is absolutely not more fish than there have ever been, and each generation is causing this to become worse and worse and worse. And there are people still alive right now, tons of people still alive, who remember what it was like to catch hundreds of gray trout with no sonar, with no advanced equipment on a regular basis. This was very, very, very normal. And now this fishery really does not exist anymore. Obviously, many of us know where we can go catch some gray trout, even in pretty good numbers, but this was literally everywhere. All around Wrightsville Beach, anywhere in the Pamlico Sound, this was a thing, okay? So please do not let people make you think that there are no reasons to be concerned within the fisheries. That sort of mentality is exactly how we wind up here. Clearly, our fisheries management system has failed us. There is no need to tell you all that because you don't have a flounder season this year. And if they were managed properly, you would have a flounder season. So please, folks, take this stuff to heart. There is so much more out there that I can bring to you next week. And please remember, it was the commercial fishermen, the early commercial fishermen, who protected these fisheries. I might show you guys next week. There's an old book in which they were going after the pound nets. They wanted to close the pound nets 1 month in the summer because of all the destruction of very small gray trout, okay? And the pound net is now known to be probably the least harmful commercial gear in the waters of North Carolina because it does tend to keep the fish alive. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed this week. Please reach out to Senator Lazara for me. Don't be rude or anything like that. I think I have a good inroad with him already, but just so that they know that there are a number of people in North Carolina who have a little faith in me to move forward and get some of the good things done, some of the right things done that need to be changed so that we can get our fisheries back to a better place. Okay, there's no reason things cannot be like they are in South Carolina, like they are in Florida, and even better right here in North Carolina. We have this incredible, incredible nursery. If we would just let these fish grow up, we could all enjoy the benefits of that. Again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next week.